This week on Jerusalem Dateline, CBN News exclusive interview with President Trump's envoy, U.S. Ambassador to Israel, David Friedman. Friedman addresses the historic move of the U.S. Embassy, the long-awaited peace plan, and why evangelical support is so important to the Jewish state. Plus, we'll take a look at why Airbnb chose to eliminate its listing of Jewish homes in the biblical heartland. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. U.S. Ambassador to Israel David Friedman discussed a number of pressing issues in the region with me: the upcoming peace plan of the Trump administration, the danger of Iran, and the changing politics in the Middle East, and why evangelical support is so important to Israel. Take a look. Only one U.S. ambassador in history holds the distinction of serving in Israel's capital, Jerusalem, David Friedman. Now he sits at the epicenter of a Middle East going through historic changes, a much-needed peace plan, and as we found out, unprecedented relations between the two allies.
The Trump administration is the most supportive administration with regard to Israel in American history. And I think that's helped Israel in direct ways.
A widely anticipated peace plan remains shrouded in secrecy, although Friedman explained one of its guiding principles.
Nobody should be asked to take incremental security risk in pursuit of something that has yet to bear fruit. So we're very cognizant of Israel's security needs.
Are the new regional alliances that seem to be emerging between Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, Jordan, Egypt, and Israel, is that part of the calculation?
It's all opening up, and I think it's just beginning. And I think that environment, creates opportunity. And I think it gives the Israeli public some confidence that they're not being asked to jump into an empty pool. Another marker of the Trump administration is change. During his address at the start of the Jewish New Year, Ambassador Friedman talked about slaying some of the sacred cows of the peace process, like defunding UNRWA, the right of return, and the so-called pay to slay, rewarding terrorists and their families. One other aspect that seems to be of the peace plan is the relationship with Palestinian businessmen and Israeli businessmen. And what was the importance of that meeting? On a practical level, I met with, 8 or 10 Palestinian business leaders. And to a person, what they all said to me is, let's do business. Let's get going. Let's do some work. We want to work with Jews. We want to work with Israelis. Yet overshadowing any Middle East peace plan is Iran. Iran is the danger. Iran right now is the leading international state sponsor of terrorism. Friedman noted that new sanctions against Iran will make a difference. They're extraordinary, where they can end this malign activity, or they won't, and the sanctions will continue, and ultimately, I believe their regime will fail. We also talked about why evangelical support is so important to Israel. It strengthens the president's resolve to, I think, be the best president Israel has ever had. An observant Jew, Friedman often sees his role through the lens of Scripture and showed me a constant reminder of how he hopes to serve as ambassador, a painting of the sin of the 10 spies from the book of Numbers. I've got this painting to remind me that the one sin I hope not to commit while I'm here is the sin of the spies, not to have faith, confidence, and vision. I think those are the qualities that really are essential for me to do my job the right way. And as a diplomat, Friedman sees God at work. I try to look at everything from a lens of what is best for the United States. That's my job. I represent the United States. Look, we are a nation under God. We're built on Judeo-Christian values, and much as I try, I cannot help but see the majesty of God's work in all the miracles that happen in this incredible country. We'll have more of our exclusive interview with Ambassador Friedman later in Jerusalem Dateline. But first, a number of Jewish American citizens who own property in Israel have filed a civil rights lawsuit against Airbnb, alleging that the internet hospitality company enacted a new policy that discriminates against them based on their religion. The suit came after Airbnb decided it would no longer list Jewish vacation homes in biblical Judea and Samaria or the West Bank. Some are even calling the boycott anti-Semitic.
This is Villa Herodian in Tekoa, about 15 minutes south of Jerusalem. Owned by American-Israeli Louis Weinger and his family, it's one of some 200 properties affected by Airbnb's West Bank boycott. The Weingers host events and can sleep up to 14 people in their luxurious home. It has a spectacular view of the Judean hills, and it's listed on Airbnb, but not for long.
I think it's crazy. It just doesn't make any sense that I can't list my property, but Muhammad down the street in Bethlehem can list his property and call it Palestine.
Airbnb operates in 191 countries in 81,000 cities, but it said in a press release, when we applied our decision-making framework, we concluded that we should remove listings in Israeli settlements in the occupied West Bank that are at the core of the dispute between Israelis and Palestinians.
That's obviously taking a position, a political position that I believe is discriminatory and anti-Semitic.
I think our reaction should be that we could boycott Airbnb. And anybody who cares about Israel, the Jewish people, is willing to fight against anti-Semitism should fight against Airbnb.
Israeli government minister Michael Oren says the Airbnb boycott could be just the beginning.
It has a signal that not just Jewish companies in Judea and Samaria can be boycotted, but the Jewish state can be boycotted. And we've known throughout history that waves of anti-Semitism, most recently the Nazi anti-Semitism of the 1930s, 1940s, began with a boycott of Jewish goods. This is the way it begins.
Airbnb's policy discriminates grossly against people of the Jewish faith and people of the Jewish ethnicity. They treat Jews living in the West Bank different from any other group.
Professor Eugene Kontrarovich said out of the whole world, Airbnb chose to make a point here.
There is indeed a political dispute about the West Bank, but they're not saying we're not taking listings from the West Bank. They're saying we're not taking listings from Jews in the West Bank. That's not just a double standard, that's naked discrimination.
Weinger's neighbor Rabbi Eitan Levy explained the Jewish roots of the area.
Tekoa itself was the home of the prophet Amos. In the 9th chapter of Amos, he says that God will return his people Israel, they will rebuild their conquered cities, they will sink down their roots and never more be uprooted from the land, living out those prophecies today.
For now, Weinger says he doesn't know what impact being unlisted on Airbnb will have on his business. But whatever happens, Levy says God will provide. Up next, Ambassador Friedman talks about the historic move of the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem and the state of U.S.-Israel relations. Here's more of our exclusive interview with U.S. Ambassador to Israel, David Friedman. Ambassador Friedman, so great to be with you, and thanks for being with us on CBN News.
Thanks, Chris. My pleasure to be with you.
May 14, 2018. Would you take us back to that day, and what did that mean for the United States and for Israel?
Well, I think, first and foremost, it was the day that I think the United States put itself on the right side of history. I would suggest maybe your audience might agree with me, put itself on the right side of God. It was the day that we recognized really one of the great historical truths of our time, that Israel has Jerusalem as its capital, has always had Jerusalem as its capital. People mentioned to me in that context around that period of time, what's the big deal? Everybody knows Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. Isn't it just symbolic? And the answer is just the opposite. The fact is that everybody recognized Jerusalem was the capital of Israel. 3 presidents recognized Jerusalem was the capital of Israel. Congress recognized Jerusalem was the capital of Israel by overwhelming majorities, but no one did anything about it. And when something is true and you fail to recognize an obvious truth, that failure it can be very debilitating from the perspective of your foreign policy. So President Trump closed the deal. He sided with the truth. And I think that decision has now resonated throughout his foreign policy in all kinds of directions. It's, I think, strengthened us with regard to Iran, North Korea, other malign influences in the world. And I think it was just an extraordinarily important decision for the United States.
Yeah. How would you describe U.S.-Israel relations 2 years after President Trump has taken over office?
Yeah, I think they're at a level that's unprecedented, whether it's commercial relations, intelligence sharing, military cooperation. I think just sort of the feeling that Israelis have for their support from the United States. The Trump administration is the most supportive administration with regard to Israel in American history. And I think that's helped Israel in direct ways from, as I mentioned, the direct contacts, but also I think it's given Israel a stature with regard to its neighbors, with regard to the region, that I think enables it to branch out in ways that we really haven't seen before. So I think we're seeing extraordinary things happening with regard to Israel, and they're all positive.
What lessons from the Bible do you apply to being ambassador to Israel?
Well, the primary lesson I would think is on the painting that's right behind you. It's it's a painting with regard to the sin of the spies, who came back after spying on the land of Israel and told Moses, with the exception of two, with the exception of Joshua and Caleb, the other 10 said, you know, we just can't conquer this land. And God considered it to be a great sin that the spies didn't have the confidence and the faith and the courage to believe in him and to go forward. And so, to me, the great lesson, the great biblical lesson to me is, look, I have no doubt I've committed many sins in the past. I'll commit many more in the future. But the one sin I hope not to commit while I'm here is the sin of the spies, which is the sin of not having faith or vision or courage or confidence in God's will and in the directions of the president. I think we're on the right track.
Coming up, Ambassador Friedman talks about why evangelical Christians mean so much to Israel. Here's what Ambassador Friedman had to say about the support of evangelical Christians. You referred to our viewers earlier. Millions of evangelical Christians really see Israel as their number one issue. What do you say, and what would President Trump say about the support of evangelical Christians for Israel and for your stand on Israel?
Well, look, I think that the support for Israel is a principled decision. But when you have a principled decision that also has the benefit of being supported by, you know, a mass of 50, you know better than me the number, but a large number of millions of believers, of evangelical Christians, it really strengthens the decision. It strengthens the president's resolve to, I think, be the best president Israel has ever had. So I think Israelis across the spectrum have great appreciation and gratitude to the evangelical community.
You said Israel is a very small country. Do you think there's things that the American people don't know about Israel because they're not being told about it in the media?
Oh, I think there's lots of things that they don't know about Israel. One of the most important things is, just in practical terms, how important an ally Israel is to the United States. Without going into details, there are numerous events, dangerous events, terrorist events that were threatened against the American homeland, on American soil, that Israeli intelligence helped to prevent. You know, the Israelis do a lot for us. We do a lot for them. And maybe a generation ago, the relationship was more one-sided, where America was more of the giver and Israel was the taker. The relationship has grown much more reciprocal over the last generation, and Israel is a very important ally to the United States with regard to keeping Americans safe at home.
A lot of people are interested in the peace plan that President Trump, you have been part of that. I know you pushed back perhaps yesterday about the White House holding back the timing. Can you tell us a little bit about the possible timing and about general principles perhaps? I know you can't go into details about the peace plan.
Well, look, in terms of the timing, they say timing is everything in life. And we really need to get to a point where we feel that we have something which will get the best possible reception from across the spectrum of all the players, obviously the Israelis and the Palestinians, and the regional players as well. And we're working on it, and we're having ongoing conversations. And so I think we just need to kind of hit it at the right time with the right message, and we'll get there, but we're not there just yet.
Are the new regional alliances that seem to be emerging between Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, Jordan, Egypt, and Israel, is that part of the calculation?
Well, it is, sure, because I think this all, this is a small area and an interconnected area, and I think the opportunities that Israel has are much greater. Just as the risks have changed, the opportunities are also much greater. Look, you saw they played Hatikva in Abu Dhabi a couple weeks ago at the judo championships. The Prime Minister visited Oman. There's relationships with Bahrain. The Prime Minister of Chad arrived to Israel yesterday. It's all opening up, and I think it's just beginning. And I think that environment, creates opportunity, and I think it gives the Israeli public some confidence that they're not being asked to jump into an empty pool.
You mentioned in this year's Rosh Hashanah speech three things. You mentioned Iran, the United States pulling out of the deal. I think you mentioned slaying the cows, sacred cows of the calcified thinking of the peace process, and Jerusalem. In terms of Iran, how important is that? What danger does it pose to Israel and the U.S. and even the world?
Well, I think Iran is the danger. I mean, there are others as well. I don't want to leave out others. North Korea is certainly dangerous. Russia is certainly dangerous. But Iran right now is the leading international state sponsor of terrorism. And its tentacles are reaching throughout the Middle East, into Europe. As you know, there were recently some terrorist attacks that Iran had plotted on European soil that the Israelis were able to get out in front of. So we have to stop that. And it's not just nuclear weapons, although nuclear weapons is obviously a significant part of it, but it's ballistic weapons, it's general malign activity, it's this adventurism that's created conflict in Yemen, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon. It all has to stop. And the sanctions that we've imposed, and they're just kicking in now, we're now really in the second full week of those, or the third full week of those sanctions. They're extraordinary, and I think they are going to ultimately put the Iranian government in a position where they can end this malign activity, end their adventurism, and their nuclear ambitions in favor of their own people, or they won't, and the sanctions will continue, and ultimately, I believe their regime will fail. But I think that we're in an extraordinarily strong position right now with Iran. And based upon what I've learned since I've had this position, I can tell you that the Iran deal, as bad as I thought it was when I was outside the government, with the benefit of what I know now and the benefit of a year or two of observations of the post-deal environment, boy, was that a terrible deal, and thank God the president was able to get us out of it.
Up next, President Trump, King Cyrus, and the Jewish people. Outside the new U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem, Ambassador Friedman told me how he sees President Trump's relationship to the Jewish people. Ambassador, what does it mean for you when you come out here and take a look at the plaque?
Well, it's kind of overwhelming. I walk past here and see my name inscribed here. Of course, it's the third name behind the president and the vice president, and they deserve all the credit for this, but it is something to see your name on something so historic. So it's deeply meaningful to me, and I just can't imagine being prouder of anything else other than my kids.
What was that day like, May 14, 2018?
It was an interesting day because apart from all the things that you saw from being here, all of a sudden I'm a producer of a live television show.
That's right.
So I had to worry about things like, when they pull the curtain here, is it going to open?
Exactly.
And the day before, it didn't open.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we had. So I said, listen, get somebody up there, make sure this thing opens. We only get a chance to do it once.
Sure.
So sure, we had a lot of logistics to worry about, but I thought it came off really nicely. I was very happy with it, and of course it was deeply moving from start to finish.
Prime Minister Netanyahu on that day said, "We're living history." Did you have that sense as well?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but I'm living history every day.
Yeah.
I mean, May 14th was an amazing day, but I try to make every day like that and not take it for granted and try to do something productive every day. Can't always be opening an embassy, but there's, as I said earlier, there's a lot to do. We try to make every day count.
You feel like you're making progress?
I do, yeah. I think we're on the right track.
And it was almost, for many people, it felt like, at least Israelis talk about President Trump as King Cyrus.
I think what he did was incredibly historic, and it took tremendous courage. I was with him as he was making the decision, as he was getting advice from others, as he was hearing from world leaders. The pressure on him not to do this, the pressure on him to just keep the status quo was tremendous. And I saw firsthand the courage and the strength of conviction that he had in making this decision. So I certainly don't think that comparison is overstated. He deserves everything that I think people appreciate him for.
It was an honor to sit down with Ambassador Friedman, and please pray for this godly man as he serves in a very strategic role for such a time as this. Well, that's all for this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Thanks for joining us. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.